When I turned 18, my parents made sure I understood what freedom meant, or rather, what they believed freedom to be. With nothing but a backpack and $50, they kicked me out of the house like some unwanted guest. "You're a failure," my father grumbled, his voice thick with disappointment. As I stood there in the driveway, my hands trembling, the house I had spent my entire life in, the house with its perfect manicured lawn and towering columns, now felt like a prison I had to escape. "No daughter of mine would choose art over a real career," he barked. My mother, standing beside him, folded her arms tightly, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the sunlight like it always did. Even in moments like this, the image of her perfect exterior was a sharp contrast to the coldness in her eyes. She didn't care about me. She cared about appearances. "We've given you everything, Clara," she continued, her voice syrupy sweet, dripping with false concern. "And this is how you repay us? By throwing your life away." Everything they ever did for me had a price tag attached. The piano lessons I had loved so much weren't for me. They were a tool to pad my college applications. The art supplies I cherished, the ones that made my heart feel light, were allowed only because they thought it would look good on my resume. Even volunteering at the animal shelter had been a charade. "Not prestigious enough," they said. "You need to do something with more impact, more visibility." So I stopped going. I stood there, at the edge of the driveway, staring at those huge iron gates that had always been a symbol of security, of stability. But now, they closed behind me like a chapter one couldn't erase. The house that once felt like home now seemed like a gilded cage, and the truth settled heavily in my chest. I was alone. But being 18 and thrown out into the world with no money, no plan, it was terrifying. My entire life had been mapped out for me, every decision controlled. And now I was expected to figure it all out on my own? That's when I saw her. I didn't even know Aunt Margaret was there that day, watching everything unfold from her sleek, black car parked down the street. Aunt Margaret had always been the wild card in our family. Unlike my father, who became a surgeon only for the prestige, Aunt Margaret built her own empire from the ground up. She wasn't interested in the glossy image of success. She was interested in real power, real change. "Get in," she said when she pulled up next to me, her voice calm but commanding. I'd always admired Aunt Margaret. She was the opposite of my parents, kind, genuine, and more focused on who I was than what I could bring to the table in terms of accolades. She didn't care about how I fit into her vision of the world. She cared about who I could be, who I was meant to be. She was everything my parents were not. She wore a perfectly tailored suit, her heels clicking confidently as she opened the door for me. But her smile, warm and reassuring, gave me the first real sense of safety I'd felt all day. "They're wrong about you, Clara," she said as we drove away from the house that had once felt like mine. "Art isn't just about pretty pictures. It's about seeing the world differently. And that's what makes you special." That moment was the first time I felt like someone truly saw me, not for the daughter I was expected to be, but for the person I could become. Aunt Margaret didn't just offer me a place to stay. She offered me a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to discover who I really was outside the suffocating grip of my parents' expectations. It was the start of a journey that would take me further than I ever thought possible. A journey where I would learn to embrace my dreams and not apologize for them. A journey where I would become more than just the girl who had been cast aside. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Leaving that house was the best decision I ever made. I stood there, frozen, as the words my father spat at me echoed in the air. It was as if the house, the very walls I had grown up in, suddenly turned into an alien space, foreign and hostile. I had always known my parents had expectations, grand ones to be sure, but nothing prepared me for the crushing weight of their disappointment. The scorn they directed at me when I chose to follow my passion for art instead of pursuing a career in medicine. "You're a failure, Clara." His words hit like a slap, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the years of pressure that had built up behind them. Years of piano lessons that weren't about love for music but about the name on my college application. Years of art supplies that were nothing more than tools for a resume. Years of being shaped into something I never truly wanted to be. My mother stood there beside him, arms crossed, her gaze sharp and cold. The diamond tennis bracelet she always wore gleamed in the sunlight, mocking me as it caught the light. "We've given you everything, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And this is how you repay us? By throwing your life away." Everything they'd ever given me came with conditions. I realized, standing there, that I had never been their daughter in their eyes. I had been a project, an investment, and now that I refused to follow the script they'd written for me, I was discarded. I felt a wave of panic rising, the overwhelming fear of the unknown. What now? With nothing but a backpack slung over my shoulder, $50 in my pocket, and the weight of their disappointment pressing down on me, I felt the gravity of my situation sink in. It wasn't just about being kicked out. It was the realization that my entire life had been designed by someone else. And now it was up to me to start over. The realization hit like a gut punch. I had no safety net, no plan, no one left to turn to except for one person. I turned to look at the long driveway, the path I had walked so many times before, the path that now seemed like a road leading to nowhere. The big, imposing iron gates at the end of the driveway slowly creaked closed, and for a moment, I almost wished I could run back inside, back to the life I knew, back to the security of my parents' world. But then I saw her. A sleek, black Mercedes pulled up beside me, its tinted windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. I didn't recognize it at first, but as the window rolled down, I saw her face. Aunt Margaret. She wasn't just any aunt. She was the one person in the world who had always believed in me. The one person who hadn't tried to mold me into something I wasn't. And she was the one person who had always seen me as more than just a project or a pawn in someone's game. "Get in," she said, her voice calm, like the storm inside of me had never existed. Aunt Margaret had always been the black sheep of the family. My father's older sister, the one who had rejected the conventional path in favor of something far greater. While my father chose a career in surgery, not out of passion but for prestige, Aunt Margaret had built an empire of her own from scratch. She wasn't concerned with outward appearances or titles. She was concerned with building something real, something meaningful, something that would change the world. I had always admired her. She was everything my parents weren't. Kind, thoughtful, and always more interested in who I was as a person than what I could achieve for the family name. I had spent so many years feeling trapped in a world of superficiality, of chasing hollow goals, but Aunt Margaret's very presence felt like a breath of fresh air. She wasn't interested in what I could do for her. She cared about me, about who I could become. Her smile was warm, genuine, as she offered me a place in her world, a world where I could finally be myself. "They're wrong about you, Clara," she said, her eyes locking with mine as I slid into the passenger seat. "Art isn't just about pretty pictures. It's about seeing the world differently. And that's what makes you special." Her words struck a chord deep within me, and for the first time I felt understood. Seen. I wasn't just some failed version of my parents' dream anymore. I wasn't the girl who didn't live up to their expectations. I was Clara. I was an artist, and Aunt Margaret was giving me the space to be exactly who I was meant to be. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. Aunt Margaret didn't just offer me a place to stay that day. She gave me the key to my future. She gave me a chance to be free, to build my life on my terms. And that's when I knew. Leaving my parents and their world behind was the best decision I could have ever made. The car hummed softly as we drove away, the familiar sights of my childhood home disappearing in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but there was still a heavy knot in my stomach. I didn't know where this road was taking me, but with Aunt Margaret by my side, I felt like I had at least a compass. Her calm presence, the way she navigated through the world with ease, gave me a sense of stability I had never known. It was as if, with each mile, I was shedding a layer of the life I had been forced to live, and beginning to step into the person I had always wanted to be. Aunt Margaret's penthouse was nothing like the sterile, imposing mansion I had grown up in. It wasn't cold and perfect. It was warm and welcoming. The walls were lined with art, real, raw, and unpretentious. Each piece telling a story, each stroke of paint infused with meaning. Walking through the door, I felt like I was finally home, even though I had never set foot in this place before. It was as if Aunt Margaret's home was a reflection of everything she believed in: beauty, authenticity, and the courage to be different. She didn't waste any time easing me into this new chapter. No, Aunt Margaret wasn't one for coddling, but she was patient in a way that made me feel empowered, not helpless. The first thing she said as we sat down in her spacious living room, surrounded by sleek furniture and the soft hum of city life outside, was simple. "We're going to work, Clara, but you're not alone in this. I'll help you find your way, but you have to believe in yourself, just like I do." Her words felt like a lifeline. I had spent so long doubting my worth, listening to my parents tell me I was nothing without a degree in something practical, something they could brag about at dinner parties. I had listened to them convince me that my art was a frivolous dream, something that would never amount to anything. But Aunt Margaret's belief in me was the spark I needed to ignite my own. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving in a world that valued my creativity, my vision. We spent hours talking about my future, about the possibilities that stretched before me like an endless horizon. She encouraged me to explore art in ways I never thought possible, by blending it with technology, by using it to change how people interact with the world. "Art isn't just about expression, Clara," she told me. "It's about connection. It's about creating something that makes people see the world differently. That's what you're meant to do." Her words took root in me. I had always known art was my passion, but I never realized how powerful it could be. Aunt Margaret didn't just see my potential as an artist. She saw how my work could change the world. It was the first time someone had ever looked at me and believed in me without reservations, without conditions. She wasn't asking me to follow her path. She was encouraging me to forge my own, to create something new, something that was entirely mine. And so, under her mentorship, I began to flourish. Every day, I immersed myself in my work, pushing boundaries and exploring new ways to combine my artistic vision with the world of technology. Aunt Margaret was always there, guiding me, offering advice, but never pushing too hard. She let me find my own way. Her confidence in me was contagious, and slowly, I started to believe in myself the way she believed in me. But it wasn't just her guidance that shaped me, it was her example. Aunt Margaret was a woman who had built an empire, not by following the rules, but by breaking them. She taught me that success wasn't about fitting into someone else's mold. It was about carving out your own space, unapologetically. And as I grew under her mentorship, I realized that the world wasn't as rigid as I had once believed. There were no limits, only possibilities. I had never imagined that my journey would take me here, to this point of transformation. But Aunt Margaret showed me that when you have someone who believes in you, someone who sees your potential even when you can't see it yourself, the possibilities are endless. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I was no longer the girl who had to live up to someone else's expectations. I was Clara, an artist and a creator in my own right, with the power to change the world in ways I had only dreamed of. The first few weeks at Aunt Margaret's felt like stepping into a completely new world. At first, I felt out of place, as though I was still tethered to the past, unsure of how to live without the rigid structure of my parents' expectations. But as I settled into this new life, something began to shift inside me. I could feel it, this quiet awakening, a realization that I was no longer just drifting through life. I was beginning to find purpose in my work, in my art, in who I was becoming. Aunt Margaret gave me the space I needed to explore, to create without judgment, to experiment with new ideas. She had an uncanny ability to make me believe in the value of what I was doing, even when the world around me still didn't understand it. "The best art," she would often say, "is the one that challenges the status quo, that pushes boundaries. Don't be afraid to think differently. It's the only way to make an impact. Her words rang in my ears as I dove deeper into my craft. I found myself spending hours in her sleek, modern studio, surrounded by technology and tools that I had never thought to combine with my artwork before. I had always painted on canvas, sketching with pencils and charcoal, but now I was learning how to incorporate the digital world into my creations. I started experimenting with design, using software I had never imagined myself using. The lines between art and technology blurred, and I found beauty in that fusion. This was where my two worlds collided. Every time I created something new, a sense of accomplishment filled me, and with that came confidence. The more I worked, the more I realized that I was finally on the right path. My art wasn't just about me anymore. It was about something greater. It had the potential to change the way people saw the world, to make things simpler, to make lives easier, to bridge the gap between creativity and technology in a way that had never been done before. Aunt Margaret had always known it. She had seen in me the kind of artist who could do more than create beautiful pictures. She had seen that I could create something that had purpose. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I began to find a rhythm. My art was no longer just a way to express myself. It became a language through which I could communicate with the world. It was my way of contributing to something bigger, of being a part of something that could have an impact beyond the confines of the canvas. I wasn't just painting anymore. I was designing the future. Aunt Margaret's belief in me was the fuel I needed to keep pushing forward. She wasn't there to hover over me, but her presence was always felt, guiding me, inspiring me. She'd ask questions that made me think deeper, challenge me to go further, to think not just about what I wanted to create, but why I was creating it. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, sketching out ideas for a new project, Aunt Margaret walked in with a cup of coffee. She set it down in front of me and sat down beside me. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice gentle yet curious. "I'm trying to think of ways to bring technology and art together," I said, staring at the screen in front of me, unsure of how to articulate the ideas swirling in my head. "I want to design something that isn't just functional, but something that connects with people on a deeper level, something that feels personal." Aunt Margaret nodded, her eyes lighting up as she leaned forward. "That's it, Clara. That's what you're meant to do. Art is more than just creation. It's about connection. If you can make people feel something, if you can make them see the world differently, you've done your job. But the most important thing is to never lose sight of why you started. Keep your purpose close, and the rest will follow." In that moment, everything clicked. I realized that what I had been searching for all along was purpose. Not just in my art, but in my life. I wasn't just creating for the sake of creating anymore. I was creating because I had something to say, something important. I wasn't just following a dream. I was living it. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the right path. This wasn't just about success or failure. This was about finding fulfillment in the work I was doing, about creating something that could change the world, no matter how small the impact might seem at first. I had finally found my purpose, and with Aunt Margaret by my side, I knew I could do anything. It was a rainy morning when Aunt Margaret's health took a turn for the worse. The days leading up to that moment had been filled with an unspoken tension, a quiet sense that something was wrong, though she never once said it. She had always been the picture of strength, the woman who built an empire with her bare hands, the woman who refused to be vulnerable. She never let on how much she was struggling. In fact, she had kept it from me entirely. Her illness, the pain, the doctor's visits. To her, admitting weakness was never an option. But one morning, as I walked into her office, I saw her slumped in her chair, her usually vibrant face pale, her eyes distant. The sharp, determined woman who had always been at the helm of everything was no longer there. It was the first time I had ever seen her so small, so human. My heart sank, the weight of the moment crushing me, as if the air around us had thickened. I rushed to her side, asking if she needed anything, but she simply smiled softly, as if to reassure me that everything was fine. But we both knew it wasn't. The next few weeks were a blur. I watched Aunt Margaret's energy slowly drain away, and with it, A part of me felt as though I was losing the only real family I had ever known. She was always so composed, so in control, that seeing her this way felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever believed about her. But I didn't let myself break down. Not yet. I had to be strong for her. I had to be strong for myself. It was on a cold afternoon, with the city skyline stretching out in the distance, that she finally told me. She had been diagnosed with cancer. Terminal. A diagnosis she had received months earlier, but never once shared with me. She told me it wasn't because she didn't trust me, but because she wanted to protect me. She didn't want to burden me with her illness when I had so much potential, so much life ahead of me. I sat there, numb, as the weight of her words settled in. The woman who had been my guiding light, my rock, was slipping away. I had always looked up to her, admired her strength, her ability to navigate the world with such grace and power. But now, she was just as vulnerable as I had been when I first stepped into her world. And I realized, with a jolt, that she had never asked for anything in return. Not once. All she had ever wanted was for me to succeed, for me to find my purpose, to be the person I was always meant to be. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of helplessness. Every time I looked at her, I saw not just the woman who had mentored me, but the woman who had been my mother, my protector, my anchor. And now she was fading, slowly but surely, out of my life. But Aunt Margaret didn't let me wallow in despair. Even as she grew weaker, she pushed me harder. "You're ready, Clara," she would say. "Don't stop. Don't you dare let my fight go to waste. You are the future now. Take it. Make it yours." Those words, heavy with both love and urgency, became my lifeline. Even as she slipped further away, she was still teaching me, still guiding me, still preparing me for what was to come. It was as if, in those final moments, she was trying to equip me with everything I would need to carry on the legacy she had worked so hard to build. When the end finally came, it was peaceful, almost serene. Aunt Margaret passed away in the quiet of her penthouse, with no fanfare, no grand last words. Just her and me and the legacy she had left behind. Her funeral, as expected, was elegant, understated, just like her. It was a celebration of her life, of her brilliance, her kindness, her unshakable belief in me. But even as I sat there in the front row, holding back tears, there was a sense of finality I wasn't prepared for. The empty space beside me felt colder than I could have imagined, and for a moment, I didn't know how to move forward without her. It was as if the world had shifted, and I was left behind, standing on the edge of everything I had worked for, everything she had worked for, without her there to guide me. And then, as I was lost in my grief, something unexpected happened. The doors to the church opened, and in walked my parents. The very people who had discarded me, who had thrown me away like an afterthought, were now standing in front of me. They were older, worn down by time, but their arrogance was still the same. My mother, in her designer black, her face a mask of feigned sorrow, and my father, who looked more like a man broken by life than the towering figure he once was. They walked toward me, their eyes locking with mine, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of anger and disbelief. Here they were, 5 years after they had abandoned me, pretending to care, pretending to be concerned. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Not yet. I was still too raw, still too lost in the pain of losing Aunt Margaret. But that pain, I would soon realize, would give way to something else entirely. Something I hadn't expected. Something that would change everything. As I watched them approach, I knew that, for better or worse, I had become someone they didn't recognize. The girl they had once cast aside, the girl they had hoped would disappear, was now standing tall, ready to take the reins. And I wasn't about to let them take that from me. But before all of that unfolded, I had one last conversation with Aunt Margaret to finish. The church was still, the air thick with grief and unspoken words as I sat there, trying to hold myself together. My parents, pretending to mourn, now sat across from me, their expressions a strange mixture of calculated concern and thinly veiled expectation. But I wasn't fooled. They had never cared for Aunt Margaret, not in the way I had. They cared about her fortune, her success, the things she could provide. As the funeral ceremony came to an end, I felt the weight of their gaze on me. It was as if they were waiting for me to crumble, to fall into the familiar role of the lost, abandoned daughter they thought they knew. But I was different now. I had grown. I wasn't that scared girl they had thrown out so many years ago. I was Clara, and I had a purpose now, one that no amount of money or manipulation could take away from me. After the service, we all gathered in a small, tense room for the reading of Aunt Margaret's will. My parents, seated across from me, had an air of quiet anticipation about them, but I knew better than to think they were concerned about my well-being. No, they were waiting for their cut, their share of the empire Aunt Margaret had built from nothing. The room was cold, the silence between us thick with unspoken tension. Aunt Margaret's attorney, a woman named Victoria Chun, stood at the head of the table, her expression unreadable as she adjusted her glasses. I could feel the weight of her presence in the room, and I couldn't help but wonder what she knew, what Aunt Margaret had left for me that was about to shake the very foundation of everything my parents thought they had control over. Victoria opened the envelope, her voice steady as she began to read. "To my beloved niece, Clara Montgomery," she began, and the sound of my name echoed in the quiet room. My heart skipped a beat. There was no turning back now. My parents shifted in their seats, their faces carefully composed, but I could see the tension in their eyes. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did I, really, but in that moment, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Aunt Margaret had prepared me for this. I wasn't afraid anymore. Victoria continued, her voice unwavering. "I leave you my entire estate. This includes, but is not limited to, my controlling shares in Montgomery Tech, valued at $2.8 billion, all of my real estate holdings, both domestic and international, and my complete investment portfolio. I also bequeath you full ownership of Montgomery Industries." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I could see the shock on my parents' faces, their mouths opening and closing as if they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. But they couldn't stop it. It was real. It was happening. And I was the one standing at the center of it all. Victoria paused, giving my parents a moment to process the shock, though it was clear they hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of what was unfolding. Then she spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of Aunt Margaret's final wishes. "Furthermore, I appoint Clara Montgomery as my successor, effective immediately upon my passing, to assume the role of CEO of Montgomery Tech and President of Montgomery Industries." The room erupted in a flurry of disbelief, my father's face turning red with fury, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he stood up. "This is a joke," he roared, his voice full of outrage. "I'm her only sibling. I should have been the one to inherit everything." But Victoria remained calm, her gaze never faltering as she continued reading. "Clara has been overseeing the UI/UX division at Montgomery Tech for the past year, leading to a 40% increase in user satisfaction and a significant rise in stock value. These are documented achievements. Clara's leadership has already proven invaluable to the company." As the words sank in, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't flinch. My parents' attempts to dismiss my accomplishments, to undermine my role, meant nothing anymore. Aunt Margaret had believed in me. She had seen my potential long before I had ever realized it myself. And now, everything she had worked for, everything she had built, was in my hands. I reached for the silver key pendant Aunt Margaret had given me, its cool metal a steady reminder of the journey I had ahead. My parents continued to protest, their voices growing louder, but I wasn't listening anymore. This was my moment, and I was ready. Victoria took a deep breath and slid another document across the table, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest moment of acknowledgement. "There is one more thing," she said, her voice now tinged with something like satisfaction. "There is evidence of your father's involvement in certain unethical practices within the medical field. This flash drive contains files, documents, and recordings of these actions, all of which will be turned over to the appropriate authorities unless Clara chooses to use them otherwise." My father's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no words coming out. My mother, who had been silent up until this point, let out a shaky breath and leaned back in her chair, her eyes flickering between Victoria and me, as if trying to make sense of what was happening. The weight of the moment hit me fully as I realized just how much Aunt Margaret had thought ahead. She had prepared me for every possible outcome. She had known what I would need to protect myself, what I would need to hold on to when it all came crashing down. With a calmness I hadn't expected from myself, I looked up at my parents. "You may have tried to control everything in my life," I said, my voice steady. "But this is mine, and I will not let you take it from me." I turned to Victoria and nodded. "Please make the necessary arrangements for my parents to be escorted off the premises, and begin drafting the legal documents that will prevent them from ever setting foot in Montgomery Tech again." My father's face twisted with rage, but I didn't flinch. "You ungrateful little—" he began, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not finished. Draft a press release announcing my appointment as CEO. I'll be having a board meeting first thing tomorrow morning." The room fell silent as my parents were escorted out, their protests fading into the distance. As the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. This was it. The beginning of everything Aunt Margaret had worked for, everything she had believed in, and I was ready to carry that legacy forward. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of responsibility, not as a burden, but as a privilege. Aunt Margaret had given me the keys to her empire, but more importantly, she had given me the courage to take control. And I wasn't about to waste it. The days following the will reading felt like a whirlwind. There was no time to dwell on what had happened, no time to pause and catch my breath. The company needed me. Montgomery Tech needed me. And I could feel Aunt Margaret's presence urging me forward, guiding my every move. But amid the chaos of preparing for my first board meeting, one thing kept gnawing at me. The unresolved tension with my parents. The anger, the betrayal. It was all still there, simmering beneath the surface. And I knew I couldn't move forward without facing them. It was late one evening when they showed up at my office. I had been sitting at my desk, reviewing financial reports and trying to make sense of the overwhelming responsibility that had just been thrust upon me. My mind was racing with plans, ideas, and the sheer magnitude of what lay ahead when I heard the unmistakable click of high heels on marble. I looked up to find my mother, followed closely by my father, standing in the doorway of my office. They hadn't even bothered to knock. My mother, dressed in her signature designer black, looked as poised and immaculate as ever. But there was a tightness to her posture, a rigidity that didn't go unnoticed. My father, on the other hand, looked more haggard than I had ever seen him. His tailored suit seemed to hang off him, as though it no longer fit the man he had once been. His arrogance had been replaced by something else, something darker, more desperate. "Clara?" my mother began, her voice dripping with the same sickly sweet tone she had used at the funeral. "We've been so worried about you." I stared at her for a long moment, taking in the absurdity of it all. "Worried?" I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady. "You didn't care when you kicked me out of the house, when you cut me off without a second thought. You didn't care when you left me to fend for myself." My father stepped forward, his face turning a shade of crimson that matched the fury in his eyes. "This little rebellion has gone on long enough, Clara," he growled. "It's time for you to come home. We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us? By ruining your life." I felt a flash of anger surge through me, but I fought to keep my voice calm, my tone unwavering. "No, Dad. You never gave me anything. Everything you gave came with strings attached, with conditions. You never gave me the freedom to choose, to live for myself." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My father's face twisted in disbelief, but my mother, ever the strategist, shifted her approach. Her expression softened, and she placed a hand on the desk in front of me, her fingers lingering as though trying to make some kind of connection. "Clara," she said, her voice low and coaxing, "Sweetheart, this is far too great a burden for someone your age. Let us help you. We're family, after all. You don't have to do this alone." Family. The word hit me like a slap. This was the same family that had abandoned me without a second thought. The same family that had never once supported my dreams, never once believed in me. I drew in a sharp breath, and for the first time in my life, I let myself feel the full weight of everything they had taken from me. Family, I said, my voice steady but cold. Family doesn't abandon their daughter with nothing but $50. Family doesn't cut ties because you don't fit into their perfect little world. You gave up on me the moment I chose to follow my own path. But Aunt Margaret was the family I needed. She believed in me. She saw me for who I truly am. The room went still as I said the words out loud, and I realized, for the first time, how much I had been holding back. The grief, the anger, the resentment. It all came rushing forward in that single moment. But I didn't break. Couldn't. My father let out a sharp exhale, his nostrils flaring in anger. You don't know what you're doing, Clara, he sneered. This is all a game to you, isn't it? You think you can just waltz in here and take over without any idea of what you're really getting yourself into? You're nothing but a little girl who thinks she knows better than everyone else. I stood, slowly, deliberately, and faced him. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I'm taking control of my own life, of my future. And unlike you, I'm not doing it for the money or the status. I'm doing it because I believe in something greater. I believe in the work we're doing at Montgomery Tech. I believe in the legacy Aunt Margaret left behind. And I'm not going to let you, or anyone else, destroy that. My parents exchanged a look, their expressions hardening. My father opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off before he could speak. Don't bother, I said, my tone firm. I'm not the same person I was when I left your house. I'm stronger now. I've built something you could never understand. And as for your help, I don't need it. Not from you. My mother's face twisted with something darker, something almost venomous. You'll regret this, Clara, she hissed, her words full of malice. You don't know what you're up against. I held her gaze without flinching, my heart steady. Actually, I do, I said, my voice cold and final. And I'm not afraid of it. You should be. As I watched them turn and leave my office, their footsteps echoing down the hallway, a sense of liberation washed over me. This was it. The final break. There was no turning back now. They had underestimated me, as they always had, and now they would see the woman I had become, the leader I was destined to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't backing down. I had Aunt Margaret's legacy to uphold, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my parents, take that from me. I was ready. I had the strength to move forward, to build something that truly mattered, something that would change the world. And nothing could stand in my way. The day I walked into the Montgomery Tech headquarters as CEO, everything felt different. The building, with its sleek glass facade and cutting-edge design, no longer felt like just another office. It felt like a battleground, my battleground. I was no longer the scared girl who had been thrown out by her parents, clinging to a backpack and $50. I was Clara Montgomery, the woman who had fought for her place in a world that tried to deny her, the woman who was about to take this company to new heights. As I stepped into my office for the first time, I couldn't help but pause. The space was everything Aunt Margaret had wanted for me. Modern, powerful, and full of potential. The walls were adorned with artwork that was bold, daring, much like the woman who had mentored me. The desk was large, commanding, but the room felt strangely empty without her presence. I could still hear her voice in my mind, urging me to trust my instincts, to not be afraid of making waves. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The first few days were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and adjustments. The board, most of whom had worked with Aunt Margaret for years, were skeptical at first. They looked at me with doubt in their eyes, unsure if I had the experience to lead such a massive company. They saw me as the artist, the outsider who had never followed the traditional path. But I wasn't just the artist. I was the future of Montgomery Tech, and I had something they didn't: vision. The first major challenge came when I was tasked with overseeing the launch of a new project, a highly anticipated venture that could either make or break the company's future in the tech industry. Aunt Margaret had always been ahead of her time, and this project was no different. But it needed more than just technical know-how. It needed someone who could understand the human side of things. The user experience. The art of connection. That was where I came in. I gathered the team in the sleek, modern conference room, my eyes scanning the faces of the executives who were all looking at me, waiting for me to speak. The pressure was palpable, but I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. I had spent too many years listening to others tell me what I could and couldn't do. I wasn't going to let that dictate my future any longer. I know this project is a big deal. I began, my voice steady and confident. But this is about more than just creating a product. This is about making a difference. Our goal isn't just to build something that works. We need to create something that connects with people, that changes the way they live and work. We're not just making a piece of technology. We're changing lives. There was a moment of silence as the room absorbed my words. Some of the faces were skeptical, but others were intrigued. I could see the shift, the subtle change in their expressions as they realized that I wasn't just talking about business. I was talking about a vision. A vision that went beyond numbers and profits. A vision that could leave a lasting impact on the world. We worked tirelessly for weeks, refining designs, testing prototypes, and pushing ourselves to think outside the box. I challenged my team to embrace new ideas, to take risks, and to believe in the power of innovation. And slowly, the project began to take shape. It wasn't just a product. It was a revolution in the making. The day we finally launched the project was a defining moment in my journey. The media buzzed with excitement, the stock prices soared, and the response from users was overwhelming. But what hit me the hardest wasn't the success. It was the realization that this was just the beginning. Aunt Margaret's legacy was not just about building a company. It was about building something that could change the world. And now I was carrying that legacy forward. As the days turned into weeks, the respect I had earned from the board and the team grew. They saw my commitment, my drive, and most importantly, my ability to lead with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a CEO, I was the heart of the company. And that's exactly what Aunt Margaret had wanted for me. She had prepared me for this, not just through business meetings and late-night strategy sessions, but through everything she had taught me about believing in myself, about seeing the world differently, about using my art to change lives. Every decision I made, every step I took, was guided by the lessons she had imparted. And though she wasn't physically here, I could feel her presence in every move I made. She was with me, every step of the way, whispering words of encouragement when I needed them the most, pushing me to be better, to be stronger. I had never imagined that I would be in this position, leading one of the most successful tech companies in the world. But here I was, standing at the helm of Montgomery Tech, with a legacy to protect and a future to create. I was no longer just Clara Montgomery, the girl who had been cast aside. I was Clara Montgomery, the CEO, and I was ready to change the world. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But I was no longer the person who would run away from fear. I was the person who would face it head-on with strength, determination, and a belief in the power of my vision. And with Aunt Margaret's legacy solidified, I knew I was ready to build something that would last, something that would impact generations to come. This was only the beginning. The world was mine to shape, and nothing could stand in my way. The air in my office was thick with tension as I looked across the table at my parents, who had somehow managed to worm their way back into my life, despite everything they had done to me. Their presence was suffocating, as though they were still trying to control the space, to force me back into the mold they had created for me all those years ago. They hadn't changed, not really. Their eyes still held that same look of superiority, that same sense of entitlement. They still believed that they could take everything from me, that they could control my future, my decisions, my success. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't the same scared little girl they had discarded. I wasn't the girl who had begged for their approval. I was Clara Montgomery, the woman who had carved her own path and built something they could never take away. "You've made a terrible mistake, Clara." My father's voice was low, cold, laced with contempt. You're too young for this. You're out of your depth. You think you can run a multi-billion-dollar empire with no experience, no real qualifications. You'll fail, and you'll fail hard. I met his gaze without flinching. Every word he spoke felt like it bounced off me, like I was no longer affected by the weight of his criticism. I had heard it all before. The doubts, the insults, the dismissal. He had always believed that I was too weak, too impractical to succeed. But he didn't know me. He didn't know who I had become. "You've never believed in me," I said, my voice steady, calm, but firm. "You never saw me for who I am. You saw me as a project, a reflection of your own ambition. But that's not who I am, Dad. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else define me anymore." My mother, who had been silent up until now, spoke in that sickly sweet tone of hers, the one she used when she was trying to manipulate, trying to control. "Clara, darling," she said, her eyes softening in what I knew was a feigned display of concern. "We're just worried about you. This is too much for you to handle. You need our help, sweetheart. We're family. We can help you take control of everything. Get things back on track." Family. The word seemed hollow, empty, coming from her. This was the same woman who had pushed me aside when I was at my lowest, the same woman who had abandoned me when I needed her most. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the power, the money, the control she had lost. I could feel my fists clenching at my sides, but I didn't let the anger take over. I had learned too much from Aunt Margaret about how to hold my ground, about how to stay calm when others tried to rattle me. I looked at my parents, my expression unwavering. "No, Mom," I said, my voice hard now, each word like a final nail in the coffin of the past. "I don't need your help. Not anymore. I'm not a little girl anymore, waiting for you to fix everything. I've built something for myself, something you could never understand. You've never supported me, never believed in me. And I'm done letting you think you can control my life." My father's face reddened with fury. His jaw clenched tight as if he was trying to keep his anger in check. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "You'll regret this, Clara. You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone," I said quietly, my voice softening for just a moment. "I have everything I need. I have the people who believe in me, who see my potential, and who have helped me get to this point. I don't need anything from you. I never did." My words hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. The silence that followed felt like a lifetime. I could see the realization slowly sinking in, the flicker of doubt in their eyes as they understood, really understood, that they had no power over me anymore. They had no hold on my future, no claim to the life I had worked so hard to build. My mother's face twisted with bitterness, her eyes flashing with anger and resentment. "You'll regret this, Clara," she spat, her voice venomous. "You think you've won? You've only just begun to lose everything. We'll make sure of it." I stood up, straight and proud, my gaze never wavering. I was done with their threats, done with their manipulation. "Actually, Mom," I said, my tone low but filled with finality, "I think it's you who's already lost. You've lost me, and you've lost everything that truly mattered. You never understood what I was fighting for. You only cared about your image, your wealth, your power." With that, I turned away from them, no longer willing to share the same space with the people who had tried to destroy me, who had tried to break me down at every turn. The doors to my office swung open, and I stepped out into the hallway, where security was already waiting to escort my parents out. As they were led away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The final chapter in my struggle for independence had been written, and I had emerged victorious. I had faced them, confronted the ghosts of my past, and walked away unscathed. This was my moment, my future. No one would take it from me. The life I had built was mine, and mine alone. As I sat in my office that evening, gazing out over the city skyline, the weight of everything that had led me to this point settled on my shoulders. The room, still filled with the scent of fresh paint and polished wood, felt like a place of both creation and reflection. I had come so far, yet it was as though I was standing on the edge of an entirely new beginning. The company was thriving, but more than that, I felt like I had finally found my place in the world. The path I had walked to get here hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when I questioned whether I was strong enough to continue. But I knew now that everything I had been through, the betrayals, the setbacks, the losses, had shaped me into the leader I had become. And the journey wasn't over yet. I thought back to the countless hours Aunt Margaret and I had spent discussing the future, what we wanted to create, what we wanted to leave behind. She had always been so focused on impact, on making the world a better place through innovation. She had taught me that true success wasn't about building wealth or prestige. It was about making a difference, about using power to uplift others, not to control them. That vision, her vision, was now mine. I could feel it deep within me, driving every decision, guiding every move I made. The work we were doing at Montgomery Tech wasn't just about technology or business. It was about changing lives. I didn't just want to be a CEO. I wanted to lead a company that stood for something bigger than just profits. I wanted to create products that could solve real-world problems, that could bring people together, that could change how we interact with the world and with each other. The future wasn't some distant, abstract idea. It was right here, waiting to be shaped. I could see it clearly now, the path ahead stretching out before me, filled with endless possibilities. Montgomery Tech was on the cusp of something revolutionary. We were about to launch Project Legacy, a new initiative that would forever change the way we approached healthcare. It wasn't just another tech product. It was a system designed to make quality healthcare accessible to everyone, regardless of their income or status. This project was everything Aunt Margaret had dreamed of, and more. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges along the way, resistance from those who didn't understand the importance of what we were doing. But I was ready for it. The world was changing, and Montgomery Tech was going to lead that change. I wasn't just here to follow trends or chase the next big thing. I was here to make an impact that would last, to build something that would change lives for generations to come. As the days passed, I found myself pouring everything I had into the company, into the work, into the vision that was now mine to shape. I was no longer just a CEO. I was a force for change, a woman with a mission, and the future was in my hands. Every decision I made, every strategy one implemented, was done with the intention of leaving behind a legacy that would go beyond technology, beyond business. I wanted to build something that would outlive me, something that would stand as a testament to everything Aunt Margaret had believed in. It wasn't just about innovation anymore, it was about creating a better world. I could feel Aunt Margaret's presence in everything I did, her wisdom and her strength guiding me every step of the way. And even though she was no longer physically with me, I knew she was still with me in spirit, still watching over the company she had built, still cheering me on from the sidelines. The future was bright. It was uncertain, yes, but it was full of potential. And I wasn't going to waste it. Montgomery Tech was more than just a company. It was a movement, a vision of what the world could be if we used our resources, our skills, and our passion to create a better tomorrow. And as I stood there, looking out over the city that never slept, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The world was ours for the taking, and I was ready to shape it one bold, visionary step at a time. As I sat in my office late one night, the quiet hum of the city below seemed to mirror the stillness inside me. The last few months had been a whirlwind, filled with challenges, triumphs, and moments that tested every ounce of my strength. Yet here I was, stronger than I had ever been, standing at the helm of Montgomery Tech, a company that was no longer just a business, but a symbol of everything I had fought for. I thought back to the girl I once was, the one who had been cast aside, the one who had believed that success was something others could control, the one who had believed that her worth was defined by the approval of people who never truly saw her. But somewhere along the way something changed. Somewhere along the path of pain and disappointment, I found myself. I found my voice. I found my purpose. And now, as I looked out over the city, I realized that I wasn't just leading a company. I was leading a movement that was about empowerment, about challenging the status quo, about showing the world that success isn't defined by wealth or status, but by the impact you make, the lives you touch, and the legacy you leave behind. Aunt Margaret had always told me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the difference you make in the world. She had shown me that the real power comes not from the control you hold over others, but from the freedom to be who you are, to follow your passion, and to make a difference without apology. And now, as I stood in the place she had built, I knew that this was the legacy I was meant to carry forward. I wasn't just the CEO of Montgomery Tech. I was a symbol of resilience, of what happens when you refuse to let the world define you. I was proof that even when the world tries to tear you down, even when those who are supposed to love you abandon you, you can rise, you can rebuild, and you can create something that not only changes your life, but changes the world. The road ahead would still have its challenges. There would always be those who doubted me, who tried to tear down what I had built. But I was no longer afraid of them. I had learned that fear was just another obstacle, just another tool the world used to keep you from becoming the person you were meant to be. And I wasn't going to let it control me anymore. The truth was, I had nothing to prove to anyone. I had already proven it to myself. I had built my life from the ground up, piece by piece, and I was stronger for it. And now, I was going to use everything I had learned to build a future that would outlast me, to create something that would stand as a testament to everything Aunt Margaret had taught me. As I reflected on all that had led me here, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had found my place in the world, and it wasn't just as a leader of a company. It was as a woman who had dared to dream, who had fought for her vision, and who had stayed true to herself, no matter the cost. And as the city lights twinkled below, I knew one thing with certainty. The best was yet to come. The future was full of possibility, and I was ready to face it with strength, with hope, and with the belief that the world could be changed, one step at a time. With each passing day, the weight of responsibility that once felt so heavy now seemed like a privilege. It wasn't just the weight of leading a billion-dollar empire. It was the weight of carrying forward a vision, a legacy that had been built on something far greater than profit margins or industry accolades. It was a legacy of purpose, of empowerment, and of the belief that true success lies in making the world a better place for everyone, not just the few. I found myself waking up every morning with a renewed sense of purpose. There were still long hours, tough decisions, and moments of doubt, but I knew that I was in the right place, doing the right work. I was no longer afraid of failing because I understood now that failure was not a destination. It was simply a stepping stone to growth, to learning, and to becoming the person I was meant to be. I often thought about Aunt Margaret and the lessons she had instilled in me, the way she had pushed me to look beyond what was comfortable, to challenge the status quo, to never settle for anything less than what I knew I was capable of. Her words rang in my ears. Success isn't about proving others wrong, Clara. It's about proving yourself right. Trust in your vision, and everything else will follow. And that was exactly what I had done. I had trusted my vision. I had trusted in the power of creativity, in the importance of art, in the belief that technology and humanity could work together to make a difference. Every decision I made, every step I took was in service to that vision. It was about building something that would outlive me, something that would continue to evolve long after I had moved on. As Montgomery Tech grew, so did the impact we were having on the world. Our products were changing lives, making healthcare more accessible, helping people connect in ways they never thought possible, and creating a future where technology was no longer just a tool, but a bridge to something greater. We were breaking barriers, and in the process, we were empowering people to do the same. But it wasn't just the company's success that filled me with pride. It was the way we were changing the conversation about leadership, about what it means to be a woman in power, and about how success could be measured in ways that were far more meaningful than a bank balance. We were proving that success wasn't just about climbing to the top. It was about lifting others as you rise, about creating a culture of support, of growth, and of genuine connection. In those quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down and I reflected on everything I had accomplished, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Aunt Margaret, for everything she had done for me, for everything she had taught me. Gratitude for the strength I had found within myself to break free from the past, to claim my future, and to build something that mattered. And gratitude for the people who had believed in me along the way, the ones who saw my potential when I couldn't see it myself, who pushed me to be better, who never let me give up on my dreams. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I was living for something far greater. I was living for the future I had always dreamed of, the future where art and technology could coexist, where every person had the opportunity to make their mark on the world. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome, but I knew that I had the strength, the vision, and the purpose to face whatever came my way. The best was still ahead, and I was ready to meet it with open arms. As I stood at the window, looking out over the horizon, I realized that everything had led me here, to this moment of peace, of fulfillment, of true purpose. And in that moment, I knew that I had found my place in the world. Not as the daughter who was rejected, not as the woman who had to prove herself to others, but as Clara Montgomery, the leader, the creator, the force for change. And that, I realized, was enough. As I stood there, reflecting on everything I had overcome and all that lay ahead, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the struggles, the lessons, and the people who had shaped me along the way. It had been a journey of self-discovery, of finding strength in the face of adversity, and of realizing that true success isn't about titles or accolades. It's about staying true to yourself and using your power to create a positive impact. I had found my purpose, and now I was living it every day. And so, as I move forward, I'm more determined than ever to make a difference, to carry on Aunt Margaret's legacy, and to prove that we are all capable of more than we think. Our pasts do not define us, and no matter where you start, you have the power to shape your future. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story inspired you, if you've ever faced your own battles and found the strength to rise, I'd love for you to be a part of this community. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join me as we continue to break barriers and create a future that's brighter for us all. Together, we're unstoppable. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.